Welcome to the Fast Mode podcast series. I'm Tara Neil, and with me today is Kevin Swank, Marketing Director at Andrew. Andrew is a global leader in wireless infrastructure solutions. The company, part of the Amphenol family, equips mobile network operators and enterprises with the essential capabilities to enhance outdoor and indoor cellular networks. Kevin is a veteran of the cellular wireless industry, having worked in everything from 2G to 5G. He started his career as a software engineer and moved into leadership positions in product management and product marketing. Having worked for NEC, Nortel Networks, Inner Wireless, and Black Box, Kevin is currently responsible for marketing direction for indoor cellular networks at Andrew. Kevin joins us as part of our exclusive editorial segment on Open RAN. Welcome, Kevin. Great to have you on today's episode.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, awesome. So we've been talking about Open RAN for a long while, actually. So what new opportunities do you see in this space?
So I think we've been talking about Open RAN primarily for the macro network, right? So we're increasing adoption for mobile network operators around the globe, and key benefits such as vendor diversity, cost reduction, flexibility, sustainability. Those are some of the benefits that we're seeing as more and more Open RAN gets deployed. But I think there's a new opportunity for Open RAN, and that's really indoor networks. Not only for the mobile network operators, but it's for the venues as well, and for the enterprises. So if I break that down, for mobile network operators to begin with, Open RAN really provides a more cost-effective and scalable way to connect to traditional in-building systems, say a distributed antenna system or a DAS, or small cells. And then for venues, Open RAN really does simplify neutral host networks. So what we mean by that is multiple mobile network operators connecting to a single in-building system. And really those are game changers, not only for like stadiums and arenas, but also for like transportation hubs, campuses, hospitals. And traditionally those venues, while we've been deploying in-building solutions in those venues, it's not always easy to get a mobile network operator to actually attach to that network. And so with Open RAN, we're going to see that connectivity go much faster. And then for enterprises, Open RAN really does play into private networking. So we're starting to see the uptake of private networking, especially in things, say, like smart factories. So between the mobile network operators, the venues, and the enterprises, we think that indoor networks is going to be a good new opportunity to bridge from what we're doing with Open RAN in the macro to the indoor space.
Wow, excellent. So let me get this right. When we say the word indoors, we are not talking about FWA, are we? We are talking about indoor as in it's still like a confined perimeter, which has a combination of outdoors and indoors. How does it work?
So from an indoor perspective, we're not talking about fixed wireless access. We are really talking about enabling 5G as an example in really hard to reach venues. So it could be, again, it's stadiums, it's arenas, it's transportation hubs, it's hospitals, it's higher ed campuses. All of these places where the outdoor macro doesn't penetrate very easily. And then bringing that 5G in, not only for, not for just a small number of users, but for a really large number of users inside of a building.
All right. Okay. So deployment-wise, right, and also other technical specifications, how does Open RAN in indoor networks differ from outdoor networks?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So Open RAN outdoor, first of all, it deals with the macro network, and that whole coverage area, the nationwide coverage that mobile network operators provide all the time, right? But deploying Open RAN in that environment where you have that nationwide coverage, when you deploy Open RAN, it impacts the entire network, right? There's no it is something that is complex, and it is taking a while because it is complex. And indoor deployments are really quite different, right? Buildings are much more isolated. So, connecting Open RAN compatible radios in the form of, say, a CUDU to a DAS that acts as an RU, to throw a little bit of technical jargon in there, or having an Open RAN compatible small cell, it only affects that single building or a campus, right? And it doesn't affect the entire network. So what's interesting is it really allows the network operators to begin to look at Open RAN in a much more really surgical way, right? So coverage for building can be decided building by building, right? And so it makes the investment significantly smaller, right? While you still get the benefits of Open RAN. And it's something that the carriers could almost just for lack of better words, just play with, right? And get comfortable with deploying Open RAN in a much more controlled manner. I mean, if you really look at the average mobile network operator, the slice of their investment that they have in the macro network, it's like 95% of their budget, and the indoor space is only like 5% of their budget. So while they are investing, it is a much smaller form of an investment and something that they can be a little bit flexible with. It doesn't mean that there's no challenges, though. Because if you take traditional DAS and small cells as an example, they weren't originally designed for Open RAN. So vendors such as ourselves, we have to go back and modernize our in-building solutions, right, to make them Open RAN compatible. But that doesn't mean that every DAS and small cell is upgradable, right? There are DAS and small cell architectures that cannot be changed to become Open RAN compatible, and then there are more modern ones that can. And then the second challenge that you have is the buildings themselves, especially when you get into stadiums and arenas. We like to look at these areas. They are complex. It's like you're putting 20 cell sites into a stadium. That's the equivalent of how many radios that are going into there. And so you have a huge number of radios that are going into a very, very small space. But that's where Open RAN actually shines, right? Open RAN with a DAS, it makes deployments easier, it improves performance, and it actually makes the management of the in-building solution simpler. So while we see Open RAN continuing outdoors, we do see this opportunity indoors, and we think it's going to be a big space.
So you did mention about how different architectures for different indoor deployments. So in some places you would bring in RUs, and some places you have to work with existing the DAS systems, and then also the small cells that you have. So does that mean that you need specific vertical expertise to deploy Open RAN in each of these different use cases or different scenarios?
That's a really, really good question. I think that there are integrators, as an example, that do specialize in that indoor space, because the indoor space is different, right? It's not. We want to get to a point where deploying an in-building solution is very similar to deploying, say, a Wi-Fi solution, right? It's very IT friendly. We're not quite there yet, especially with respect to DAS. Small cells much closer to that model, but Open RAN gets us closer to that IT friendly model. And so which basically means that any kind of specialization becomes a little bit simpler and a little bit simpler. There are still going to be venues that are hard to deal with, right? Hospitals have lead line walls, as an example. Stadiums are just dealing with a huge number of people in a very, very confined space. And so the RF requirements that go into those venues are very, very unique, and do require some experience to do. And there is a huge amount of coordination that goes on between the integrator that's deploying, say, an in-building solution and the mobile network operator themselves, right? Because the RF has to be contained inside of the building, so that it doesn't compete with the outdoor macro network, and there's a simple handoff between the two.
Wow, interesting. So, we talked about the venues and then the private 5G for enterprises as being one of the two of the areas, major areas for indoor Open RAN. So, what benefits can we expect? I mean, from the subscriber point of view as well as for the operator.
I think if you look, I go back and I look at Open RAN in the macro, and look at the benefits that it brings to the macro network, and then I ask myself the question: do we get those same benefits in the indoor space? And the answer is predominantly yes. And we started to talk about those, but let's break those down a little bit. So I think the first thing that we have to understand is, what does it really mean to make an in-building system Open RAN compatible? And if we look at a traditional, say, DAS architecture is probably a good place to start. Traditionally, we would have remote radio heads associated with the baseband unit, and you would connect those to a DAS through an RF interface. And really, depending on the number of mobile network operators, depending on your capacity requirements, those remote radio heads would take up a lot of space. They require a lot of power, they require a lot of cooling, and they actually require specialized equipment to connect that radio that's being provided by the mobile network operator to the DAS itself. But with Open RAN, the architecture becomes much more simple. Those baseband units in the form of a CU/DU they now connect to the DAS digitally. There's no RF connectivity. There's no remote radio heads. There's just this direct digital interface between the CU/DU and the DAS, and that interface leverages Open RAN protocols. And really, if you look at the benefits that you achieve from that, it's in the form of flexibility, it's in the form of performance, it's in the form of sustainability. And those really apply to those large venues. But then it also becomes more cost effective and more IT friendly for enterprises. So this has huge benefits with respect to flexibility, performance, and sustainability, especially in large venues. And then from the enterprise perspective, it makes indoor solutions more cost effective and IT friendly. And I think what we'll see coming out of that is more 5G adoption by the enterprises inside of those facilities. So let's look at those from an overall perspective. Like, what does it mean to be more flexible? So really it means that the mobile network operators, CU/DUs, can be co-located at the venue where they've traditionally been located, or they can be located in the cloud. And when a mobile network operator, when that equipment becomes cloud-based, the CU/DUs they're off-site from the venues, and they're often many, many miles away. And this creates a really clear demarcation point between the mobile network operator and the venue. And this is something that enterprises want, right? And this is why private networking is gaining momentum, because the enterprises want to maintain control over their venue, over their building. And so they like this concept that the operator's equipment is not part of their enterprise, not part of their building. And so it creates this clear demarcation point, but it also impacts space and it impacts cabling. And so when we move that carry equipment out of the building, out of the venue itself, and move it off site, it can reduce the head-end requirements, the requirements for the enterprise itself by as much as 90%. It's huge. And so enterprises really like this, right? Because it creates this clear demarcation point. Obviously, it uses less space, and that's good as well. And then if we look at performance with a modern DAS, and I mentioned this already, that from the CU, DU, all the way to the DAS, everything is digital, right? There's no analog conversions. Signal quality is optimized. And really, for the first time, the CU/DUs, so the equipment that's in the mobile network operator and the DAS, they can coordinate. They can coordinate from a deployment perspective, from an upgrade perspective, from a visibility perspective, and a performance perspective. The carriers can see, all the way through their network, all the way to the radio points in the DAS. And without Open RAN, that DAS was a black hole. So the carriers could see to their CU/DU, and then the DAS was just this kind of unknown performance entity. But with Open RAN, that visibility is now in place. And then the last point is sustainability. And this is really, obviously sustainability is really important around the world. Removing those remote radio heads and all of that associated equipment, not only is it reducing the complexity of these in-building solutions, but it's really reducing the electricity requirements and the cooling requirements. So, and that number is huge as well. Those reductions could be as much as 55%. And if you looked at that from a stadium perspective, on a yearly basis, that's hundreds and hundreds of pounds of CO2 emissions that are being eliminated from the solution. So so when you put kind of these ideas of flexibility, performance, and sustainability together, there's one of our customers that I love that talks about their move from a traditional kind of a more traditional DAS to a modern digital DAS, and a move from 4G to 5G, and the move from RF interfaces to Open RAN interfaces. And they really talk about two things: that the capacity of the system has gone up by 10x, and the footprint of the system has gone down by, is now 1/10 of what it used to be. So I think those are pretty remarkable stats.
Yep.
When you're looking at deploying an in-building solution.
Yep, I think we can see significant benefits there, as you have pointed out. So let's move on to the other aspect that is often discussed when we talk about Open RAN, which is about collaboration. So we see that collaboration is really underpins the advancements that we see in Open RAN. So maybe you can talk about that, and also how Andrew faces the challenges that Andrew faces in making its solutions interoperable. Also, I think we also want to know some of the collaborative efforts that you guys have in place.
Okay. Yeah, no, there's a lot there, I think. I think, because by definition, Open RAN is multi-vendor, right? I mean, I think that's where the definition starts. And so because of that, collaboration, is everywhere. So I think really where it starts is we have multiple vendors working together And that's really cool and that's really, really important. But it's also the biggest challenge of Open RAN, right? Gone are the days where we have a monolithic baseband unit um, that is developed by one single vendor. Right now, we could have a CU developed by one vendor, a DU developed by another vendor, an RU developed by a third
Yep.
vendor, and then there's components in between, right? And so when you look at those things, obviously those could be multi-vendor, and that means that collaboration is 100% the requirement um, between all of those things. And so so if we look at kind of where we are with respect to that, like we really have in the marketplace, we have CUDUs from really very traditional radio vendors. And then if you look at, say, a DAS coming into an in-building solution, we have now moved from those RF interfaces to Open RAN interfaces. Okay, so that's good. But really, to do that, to have those CUDUs connected to a DAS through Open RAN, you have to have two things. You have to have development, and then you have to have interoperability. Um, but that development and interoperability, it doesn't just happen once. So it's not like so the CUD manufacturers are not developing a single Open RAN interface, and the DAS vendors are not developing a single open interface, and we expect that they just work together. Um, and so, really what is happening right now is, and I'll take this from a Dash perspective, is that Open RAN interface that we have developed, we have to go now work with every radio vendor and go, okay, how did you match this? How did you match the specifications? How did we match the specifications? Is there additional development that needs to be done? How do we do interoperability testing? And we have to do that with every radio vendor. So it's not this idea of develop Open RAN once and then it just works for everybody. There's a lot of work behind the scenes. But we are getting a lot of industry support. Um, so mobile network operators, they really do want Open RAN, not only for the outdoor world, but they do want it for the indoor space as well. And so we have carrier partners that are working not only with us, but other vendors to align roadmaps. They are making labs available for interoperability, and we've been doing a ton of testing throughout this year in various different parts of the globe. And then the other part of this is the Open RAN Alliance itself, and they are playing a big part. And so the Open RAN Alliance definitely sees in the indoor space as a viable space for Open RAN. And late last year, we were fortunate enough to work with them on some white papers, not only us but other vendors as well. And the Open RAN Alliance is about to publish multiple white papers, not only for traditional in-building solutions such as DAS and small cells, but also for private networking as well. And then they're also enabling things like PlugFests. And this is not necessarily just the core CUDU and the DAS as an example. There's other supporting products as well, such as test tools and things like that, that are being vetted and worked on as well. And so, I think those are things that are happening all over the world. So it's different vendors coming together to do development and interoperability. It's support organizations like the Open RAN Alliance. It's mobile network operators pushing vendors in various different ways to make this move happen. And so there's a lot of activity, and there's a lot of activity throughout the world. And I would kind of sum it up this year. I think, last year, when we were sitting here last year, Mobile World Congress was just coming up. We had pushed out a press release ourselves talking about Open RAN and our commitment to that and what was going on there. But you had a feeling it was a lot of PowerPoint throughout the industry, and there was a lot of development happening, and there was a lot of testing happening as well. But I think all of that work is starting to pay off, and we're starting to see, real viability of Open RAN um, for indoor for the indoor space, coming out into the industry.
Wow, amazing. And when do you anticipate the indoor deployment, I mean, Open RAN indoor deployment taking off in a big way?
So, so I think the good news is it's here. And I think that's really, really important because, like I said, last year, we were building and building and building. And then at the end of 2024, Verizon, in conjunction with ourselves and Samsung, announced the first commercially deployed CU-DU plus DAS in Austin, Texas. And I think that's a big deal, right? So having a live system, and it was deployed in a couple of places. One was at Moody Arena, which is part of the University of Texas, and then the other one was the Austin Convention Center. And so having gone through all of that development, having gone through all of that integration, having gone through Verizon's approval process, we can now sit back and say Open RAN is deployed in buildings in the in building space, and insignificant venues. So I think that's a huge first step for the industry. But obviously that's not where it's going to stop, right? There's more
Yeah.
deployments in the wings, and it's not just Verizon. It's not just Verizon's commitment. I think overall around the world, mobile network operators are taking notice and they're seeing the value. Because now we have we have live systems where we can say, you know what, the performance is there, uh, the levels of deployability and manageability, that the improvements that we expected, those are there, and of course, sustainability is there. And it's not to say we don't have more work to do. Um, as I stated a little bit earlier, we are not at the space where we can just develop an Open RAN interface and it works for everyone. There's a lot of development and that's still going to be required, and there's a lot of interoperability that's going to be required. But I think we've started, and I think really this year and then going into the next, say, 3 to 5 years, I think we're really going to see Open RAN really take off in indoors. And in fact, I think we will get to a point where Open RAN and the mobile network operator and their CUDU and how that connects to the DAS, and then Open RAN compliance and small cells. I think in the next couple of years, you're going to see that as a fundamental requirement by the mobile network operators, which will then, catapult these solutions into the market and make them mainstream.
Amazing. I think the early deployments are in place, and looks like you guys are ticking off some of the main goals that were envisaged for the deployment. The goals that you said were like pointed out rightly, saying that the goals. If you achieve the same goals as a macro network deployment, then you're basically you have achieved a lot. So I think
Right.
with that, we have come to the end of the session. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us and for sharing all these insights, especially introducing us to the concept of the indoor networks and also Andrew's role in this space.
You're welcome, Tara. Thank you so much.
And to everyone tuning in, thank you guys for listening. If you want to learn more, visit www.enru.com and follow us for more updates and insights as we continue to uncover the latest in technology and telecommunications. See you in our next session. Bye-bye.